He's toast. Reform taunts Rishi Sunak as PM fights for Brexiteer vote in by-elections. Reform UK candidate Ben Habib believes Rishi Sunak cannot fight back as Conservatives try to hold on to Wellingborough and Kingswood seats in by-elections. These are the Wellingborough I heard about earlier. I guess Kingswood is also another one where Reform UK might get some footing.
Okay, so small note from Motch before we get into this video. This stream was recorded before the results of the by-elections had actually come out, but they were unsurprising, so well, yeah, I'm just gonna go ahead and release this video anyway. Okay, cool, thanks.
Reform UK is, I believe it's the party that Farage started after UKIP was essentially found to be corrupt from the inside. So I don't know much about Reform UK, but I think they're probably the closest in the UK to our beliefs that actually has any presence. The Conservatives face an all-out battle for the Brexiteer vote this week as they fight to avoid by-election humiliation. Rishi Sunak's party has blitzed social media with the warning that voting for Nigel Farage's Reform UK could hand victory to Keir Starmer's Labour. Are you really more afraid of Reform UK than Labour? I mean, they are the spoiler vote. And the thing is, like, would we accept 5 years of a terrible government if at the end of it we knew that the Conservatives would be replaced with someone better? Maybe not. I don't know. Maybe that is better. Maybe that is the poison pill we have to accept. 5 years of something worse so that at the end of it we have a chance of something much better, something that actually helps. I don't know if that's worth it, but that might be what we get, and that is the best optimism I can offer for this. That's a good point, Somnus. Yeah, twins and triplets, that's true. People will go to the polls in the Wellingborough and Kingswood by-elections on Thursday, which is 2 days from now, in UK time. The Prime Minister can expect backbench panic if Reform, the rebranded Brexit party, overtakes Tories. And he could take a further knock on the same day if the latest economic data shows the country is in recession, which is likely to happen. A defiant Mr. Sunak insisted he is totally up for the fight, saying the economy is pointing in the right direction. Yeah, but Biden said the same thing, so I don't think I believe you. However, Labour is in the Labour is the 1/12th favourite. Okay, at betting odds to win the North Hants seat of Wellingborough, with Reform on 12-1 and the Tories on 16-1. Okay, so Labour has a very strong chance of winning that area. It's a shame. But Reform has a slightly better chance than the Tories do. The election was triggered by a recall petition following the suspension of former MP Peter Bone. I don't remember what happened there. Well, Matthias, I think the economy here is getting worse slower than it is in the US right now. But you'd be hard to beat, really, with Biden at the head. Though I might be mistaken about that. What is the inflation rate of the US currently? I think here it's 4.4%. That's what one of the previous articles said. Reform, whose honorary president is former UKIP leader Mr. Farage, so honorary, I don't think he's actually taking part, is tied with the Lib Dems on 8% in the most recent We Think poll of adults. That's pretty high for a non-major two-party party. Behind the Conservatives on 21% and Labour on 35%. Many Tories fear swaths of blue seats could turn red if Reform stands throughout Britain. And maybe that's what the Conservatives deserve. As I said, if that happens, if Reform has significant gains, even if they don't gain a seat, they just gain a large percentage of the vote, and then Labour completely dominates. Maybe that's what the Conservatives need to just, like, kick them into doing something better, or kick them out of politics so that Reform UK can replace them. Don't know. It's a very much a deal with the devil. I don't know if that's a good idea, because a spoiler party like that, because I think the Brexiteer vote has just rejected the Conservatives, and maybe a lot of them are going over to Reform, and that's spoiling the Conservative votes. And Reform is not likely to. Doesn't have that installed, necessary user base, so it's just going to split the vote. But that is destroying the false ally who won't do what you want, which gives your actual enemy the win for 5 years. But then in so doing, you might get an actually good answer at the end. I don't know. As Ghost says, your optimism is inspiring. It is a possibility. I could believe that would happen. But it's still a tough ask to go through 5 years of what will likely be exactly the kind of globalist Labour government we expect, at the slim chance of getting something better at the other side. But I think the chance of it is actually better than it is right now. So whatever. That if there's any hope that we can hold on to for UK politics, it's probably that. Let's continue with the article quickly. Where were we? He was also not sure Mr. Sunak would not turn around Tory fortunes before the general election, saying, no chance, he's toast. Oh, sure he would not. Okay. Also, Wellingborough reform candidate Ben Habib said that there was no chance of his party standing aside in seats held by the Conservatives. They're going for the deal with the devil. For them, it is better, but I'm not sure it's better for the country. Ginger says something to consider. If Labour gets in, the Uniparty's plans will have not changed. Why would their schedule? I haven't actually heard the Uniparty used in the context of the UK. The Rhinos and the Dems are a little bit more similar, I think, than Labour and the Conservatives in the UK, but it's much the same story. But it's a good point, Ginger. If you make the case that Labour and the Conservatives currently are basically the same, then why would Labour be worse than the Conservatives? Well, the Conservatives are basically 0% beholden to actual socialists and communists. And almost all of the Brexiteers in the last election supported Conservatives. And so the Conservatives are beholden to them. Whereas with Labour, less beholden to the Brexiteers because a lot of the Remain friendly and even Rejoin friendly and communist and socialist groups support them. So they're more beholden to them. It might not actually make much of a difference, as you say. It might be that they're so similar that it will be the same. In which case, that would be better than what I suspect. But I suspect they will be worse. Well, Firetechie, Conservatives were at least more beholden to Brexiteers than Labour are. That's the only point I'm making. Ginger says, I think Labour and Conservatives are singing from the same hymn sheet. I don't see any reason why one getting in would make an effect on the current decline. I think Labour would be worse because of the groups that they're comprised of, because of the people that they have in their positions of power. And because they are not even trying to look good to the actual Conservatives in the country, the actual Brexiteers. Maybe it won't be as bad as I think. Nicholas Van Neel says, the concept of a spoiler candidate is gay. Remove first past the post. Adopt RCV or instant runoff. I don't know much about the other two that you suggested there, but let me cover a common misconception that people have. When you ask for proportional voting, what you're asking for is for the cities to have full control of the policies that are implemented over rural areas. The reason that we have fast past the post is so that you can have regional representation, much like each state in the US has their own representation. If you just allow for a popular vote, Hillary Clinton would have won in 2016, because the cities will tend to vote more for the same things, as rural places will tend to vote more for the same things as each other, because they have those different interests. Splitting it by region prevents that to a large extent. It's a regional form of prevention of tyranny of the majority, which is not a complete prevention by any means, but it's somewhere towards that. It's tyranny by population density, essentially, and regional voting prevents that. First past the post is the way that you implement that. People describe it as if it's a way to just keep the current parties in power, but that's what happens anyway. All you'd be asking for proportional voting is to make the same thing true on a national scale, basically. It would still be the most popular parties getting their votes pretty much every time. Although obviously in the Commons, like what you think would happen is that you'd get like 50 UKIP or Reform UK candidates in the Commons and nothing else would change. What would probably actually happen is that you would just get a total mix of shit parties. Some of them will be Reform UK, but a large portion of them would be some weird lefty party or some party that you would hate to see. And some, like, certain regions will just get policies shoved on them that they hate, even more so than happens already. Now, maybe there are... everything that I say where I say it could be worse, bear in mind, everything in the UK currently could be worse. I know, it's so bad, Uzalu. Look at me, I'm so pessimistic, but it could still be worse than it is now. And first past the post at least prevents tyranny by region, or somewhat prevents it, begins to prevent it. Now, what you said about the other voting systems, I don't know about those specific ones that you mentioned, but every voting system has its flaws. Every single one. And the more complex the voting system gets, the more rarefied the flaws are likely to be, but also the less transparent the system is, and the easier, therefore, it is to fuck around with it. At least when the system is simple, such that in each region, it's a popular vote, and then for the entire country, you just go by the regions. That's simple. If you have some more complex system with multiple stages, for example, or you have some weird way of counting the votes, it gets a lot more complicated. Now, you could argue that proportional representation across the entire country is the simplest, but for the reasons I gave, it's better to have one layer of abstraction that's different from that. But the more you add on, the more the weirder, the more difficult to track it gets, and there are still problems with pretty much every voting system, still exploits with pretty much every voting system. If you have, for example, the system that France has, where they have an initial election with all the parties, and then the top two in that first election compete with each other. What this means is that you mix the best benefits of vote for who you actually want to win, not just for who you need to vote for to defeat the bad guys. Vote for who you actually like in the first round. And in the second round, you vote, again, tactically, because it's always going to happen. You're always going to get tactical vote, but you vote for the one that you would prefer out of those two that are the most popular. And you might think that sounds like a good system. And initially, I thought it did too. And honestly, maybe it is better. Maybe it's worth considering that it is better. But at the same time, what that means is that you would get rapidly churning parties, which right now would be good. Right now, that's kind of what we need. But it perhaps isn't the best answer for when you have stability. If you have a bunch of good politicians who just happen to have a bad reputation for some reason in their party, or like a bunch of good politicians in the backbenches of some party, and they just get churned out suddenly. Or what you might also get is, as often happens in the Europe, by the way, but does not happen as much in the UK or in the US, what you're also likely to get is a total mix of like 30 different parties in the legislative house or whatever you call it, where you have to get a coalition of like 4 different groups to run a government. And then you have inconsistent policies and constant bureaucratic infighting rather than having a leader. And that is the advantage of having very few parties, is you're more likely to get a leader, an actual strong leader with a consistent plan, which should make your country more responsive to change and more courageous. Whereas the very bureaucratic process that is often true in Europe, where they try to sort of control for public interest with that French system, as I mentioned, tends to muddy the waters a lot more, tends to make it a lot more grey, rather than making it clear. I've said before, a mediocre, consistent plan is better than 6 good plans all taken piecemeal. Because those 6 good plans, while they may be good on their own, are incompatible with each other. But the one consistent plan, even if it's mediocre, is at least consistent. So it's compatible with itself. So you get policies that actually make sense, theoretically. So don't knock the way the UK system is set up. Again, with a lot of these things, especially as I talk about monarchy and democracy and parliamentary versus republican, the problem is not the structures. All of these structures are okay for running a government, at least. You know, none of them can't. None of them are total failures. All of them can work. The problem is the people who are in them. Also the conventions and the expectations around them to some extent, yes, but the people who are in them. If people like us, but who also are like willing and able to do the job of running a country, were in those positions, we wouldn't have to worry about it. We wouldn't be here talking about how the system is the problem. We'd be here talking about how great things are. We're talking about what fun things to do in our country. We would be talking about how, like, arguing over which country is best, not which is worst. It's about the will of the people in power, the people that are actually in the systems. And part of that is, okay, build a system that allows for rapidly switching out those people or filtering for the right people. But most systems that are in effect today do allow for that to a roughly equal extent as each other, with different trade-offs in different areas. Most of the reason that it's not happening is propaganda, vote rigging, and other forms of cheating. It's not that the system is working as intended, it's specifically where it isn't working as intended, you get problems. Techie, as Techie says, paper voting is always better. Nicholas Van Niel says instant runoff is a form of ranked choice where the two candidates who get the most first choice votes compete for more than 50% of the ballots that didn't put them first, if that makes sense. Okay, I can kind of see what you mean there. The ranked choice thing, again, it's one of the alternative forms of voting, which is a bit more complicated, and the exploits are more narrow, but they still have exploits, and by being more complicated, you don't really get much of a benefit, I don't think, compared to a simpler system. Because overall, less people exploiting it via the exploits, but it's easier to mess with it. And so you may get more issues with it, more inconsistencies, which would have been spotted if it were simpler, but won't be because it's more complex. So I don't know. Yeah, Ginger, well, if we have 5 years Labour and it is as bad as I fear it might be, then perhaps that would be enough to change things enough. I think around the time of Brexit, the ablative figureheads, as you put it, were to a not full but large extent replaced with what there was at the time backbenchers. So it can happen, and when that happened, we got a few years of better policy, but it didn't really last. Fraud, but not rigging. I suspect so. Yes. I think there's relatively little I would change in both the UK and the US systems to get them into the right situation. Let's just do this one quickly. So people have a lot of doubts about Farage, and I understand that. And I think he is actually also against first past the post, which is silly. But people have a lot of doubts about him, especially these days, and I can understand that. But I still think that of the prominent political figures in the UK, he would be the best currently to have power that I know of. Maybe I'm mistaken. If you have any better suggestions, let me know. But I'm not sure he wants to be. I'm not sure that he's up for it, and I don't think there's really a path for him to do it. But maybe. But anyway, let's have a look at the article anyway. Nigel Farage's return to politics could go either way as desperate Tories circle. Nigel Farage made the comments during an interview where he said desperate Conservative MPs contact him several times a day. Maybe you should accept at some point. Nigel Farage has hinted he is undecided on whether to make a return to frontline politics, saying it could go either way. What you might see, actually, if the Conservatives do as badly in the election as it looks like they're going to, maybe even before the election happens, you might see a mass exodus of Conservative MPs to the Reform Party under Farage. Now, chap, reasons for optimism, as we referred to earlier, that's not perfect, but that would be a lot better than what we have now, I think. I would much rather see that. Loads of Conservative backbenchers suddenly jumping ship to the Reform Party and Nigel Farage coming back to lead it. Whatever, say what you want about the flaws in that idea, about it not being perfect, but it would be much better than what we have now, I think. I would much rather see that. I'd be happy to vote for that. It's optimistic, but it's not the kind of thing that I would rule out completely. Nigel Farage's interview is undecided. Farage made the comments during an interview with Sunday Times where he said desperate Conservative Party MPs contact him several times a day to ask what he is doing in the 2024 general election. It sounds like they want what I just described to happen, to be honest. During the interview, the former Brexit Party leader said he was not saying I'm back, but said politics for him was about what could we do, what could we change, adding the state things are in today, the country is not in a good place, nothing works. You keep moving up to the line and, making a difference and then retreating back as if you've solved the problem. You should have pushed as hard as you possibly could right at the start, all at once, and maybe then it would have been a lot better. Because you're much better than most of the people in politics right now. On the subject of regular messages from Tory MPs, Farage told the Sunday Times they're looking for something, they're desperate. I'm Uncle Nigel, they all want to know what I'm going to do. He said some Conservative MPs wanted to join Reform UK if he became leader, it's what I just described, while others wanted him to become leader of the Conservative Party. As I said, the Conservatives are so desperate, maybe one of those two things could actually happen. It's an interesting possibility. He said MPs at the Conservative Party conference he attended last year, his first since quitting the party in 1982, treated him like a prodigal son returning. Farage added in the Sunday Times interview, a lot of people who are engaged in the Tory party now got engaged in politics through me, through UKIP. So many of them have become Tory councillors, the activist base has been redefined by the grassroots base UKIP developed, and a lot of the 2019 Tory MP intake are basically UKIP, make no bones about it, he says. He predicted a wipeout for the Conservatives in the next election and said the two main things stopping him from rejoining were the chances of the party's central office refusing him membership and his life with girlfriend Law Ferrari. I don't know how to say that word, but mate, Farage, I think you kind of have a duty here I think you really should. I know people have doubts about Nigel. People say he's controlled opposition. I'm not convinced about that, but chat, would you prefer for Rishi Sunak leading the current Conservative Party to go against Labour, or would you prefer Nigel Farage leading a party full of Conservative MPs, whether it's the Conservatives or Reform, to go against Labour? Because I think the second option is clearly better. You think Nigel Farage could win a general election? I don't know, because I think a lot of the country is still dubious about Farage. But the state of things right now, maybe he could, especially if it was the Conservative Party, which people will often vote for habitually. Like, I think there are a lot of people, Brexiteers, who would be willing to vote Conservative if they thought the Conservatives had any chance of doing the right thing. But they aren't, because it's just sort of ground to a halt. If Farage was in charge of it, then the Conservatives might see a colossal comeback in the polls. I would like to see it happen. It would certainly be a lot more interesting. She just says, I think a Farage-led opposition would be amazing, but only after Labour has had their time to shine. Otherwise, there will not be the incentive for the public to support Farage. That may be true. So I think you and I are mostly on the same page with that, Ginger. And I hope that you're right, that Labour will just be not much different than the Conservatives. I expect they will be worse, but other than that, we might be on the same page there. Yeah, I've already voted for Farage once, so I think he's a lot better than the other options. Anyway, that was the UK politics. I kind of want to see what the results of this poll are. I'm going to say tentative yes. Most respondents say yes. This is the Express, after all. But, yeah. Anyway,